Hello and welcome to the Word Nerds webinar, 3 Steps to Best in Class Voice of Customer, take number 4826. Steve and I have been doing this all bloody day. My name is Pete Dakin. I am CEO, and I am joined today by my partner in linguistic crime, Steve Erdl, who is our CSO. Steve, what does CSO stand for, and did you make it up?
I didn't make that myself, I'm afraid. It stands for Chief Scientific Officer. I, for some reason, have Spock's job title, which I'm very excited about.
Excellent. And just for clarity, when did you drop science at school?
It was, I was about sort of 15 when I dropped your chemistry and biology and stuff. Obviously, I had to make time in my schedule for all the wrestling, but...
Well done. Okay, and if you don't know Word Nerds, we are the world's second best text analytics platform, and we work for some of the world's best organizations, certainly some of the world's biggest organizations, and some smaller ones as well. And we help these organizations turn all of their different text analytics text channels into actionable and useful data. So why should you spend the next 20-25 minutes with us? Well, by virtue of hanging out with all these wonderfully talented people in these huge organizations, over the past few years, we have learned a thing or two about how to build a best-in-class voice of the customer program. We say voice of customer. This also applies to voice of employee. We'll probably just use VoC because it's easier and quicker than repeating ourselves every time. But basically what we've done is we've watched how the best people in the world do it. We've taken notes. We've mercilessly stolen their best ideas. We've put them together in a 3-step framework that we're going to share with you today, and we're going to take full credit for all of their amazing ideas that we've repackaged and passed off as our own. And we give that to you completely free here now, without any expectation of anything back in return. You are very welcome to it, and we sincerely hope you'll find some use in it. What we do ask in return is that if you hang around till the end, we will give you a special offer to try and entice you into the sticky web of becoming a Word Nerds customer. So that's the quid pro quo. We'll give you loads of stuff that we think is useful, and hopefully you'll give us a chance to tell you a little bit about why we're useful to you. I mentioned it's a 3-step framework. Each step has 3 parts to it, 3 hot tips. Those 3 sections are strategy, analysis, and insight to action. At the end of those 3, we will also share with you the big challenge, the big problem that most people that we see running a voice of the customer program run into in those 3 steps. And as I mentioned before, the extra special offer right at the end. So that's what we're going to do. And to kick you off, here's Steve.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again, Pete, for that super professional introduction. My name is Steve. I am also one of the co-founders here. I am really excited to talk to you about this today, and I think it's such a great thing that you are interested in developing a high-quality voice of the customer program. But I think that your reasons for doing so should be the first thing that you understand when you're looking to build out your program. You'll have heard the whole Simon Sinek start with why thing. That is very true of a voice of the customer program. Why are you doing this? What are you hoping to achieve from it? And developing a North Star metric, developing something that your organization can look to this is why we're doing it, and this is what it's going to look like when it's great. Is really important. We have a couple of examples of that from some of our best customers. And it's fair to say that the customers that have got the most out of their voice of the customer programs, they're the ones that have started with a big, juicy why. For example, we work with a retailer whose why was around the number of customer calls that they've got. They were getting 6 million customer queries, customer communications every year. That is the equivalent of everybody in Scotland emailing you. How do you deal with that amount of data? And importantly for them, how do you make that number smaller? How do you, their goal was to try and make fewer calls coming in. And if they could understand what the problems were, if they could fix those issues at source, that would decrease the number of calls coming into them, and obviously the massive savings and return on investment that would imply. Another example, we have a major Silicon Valley player who one of their key issues was tagging comments that came in on the various websites. They were spending, they had a team of 16 people who cumulatively were spending 360 hours every quarter just tagging data, which apart from being the most boring thing you can imagine, was also costing them, again, huge amounts of time, huge amounts of money. So they wanted to reduce that number by finding new ways of putting this voice of the customer together. So think about that first. Why are you doing it? What is the thing that you're attempting to achieve there? Once you have that, the next thing to think about are your sources, your data channels. Where is this data going to come from that you're going to be using? If you work for a large organization, there will no doubt be huge swathes of data all across your organization, from social data to customer data surveys, and they're probably all run and controlled by different teams in your organization. So bringing those things together is one of those key challenges that you need to get to grips with early on in this process. So understanding where all that data is that will provide all this wonderful insight that you're going to get out of it. That is key, performing a data channel audit. Finally, within this section of strategy, have a think about your stakeholders internally in the organization. Who's got skin in this game? Who can get benefit out of the work that you're going to be doing? And then think about how you're going to measure the benefit that they're going to get. If you have clear goals already, then OKRs are a great way of doing that. You're probably already familiar with OKRs. They're very common these days. A great way of setting a goal and aiming for that. If you're not as sure as to what your outcomes might be, then thinking about GEMS is something that we'd really recommend. That's something that we've used in WordNerds quite extensively. It stands for Goal, Experiment, and Measure. It's something that, as I say, we're using quite a lot. It kind of brings a scientific method to these sort of things. So you have a hypothesis that you're looking to prove. You then conduct an experiment to prove or disprove it, and then you measure that experiment that you did. So if you don't have a clear goal for some of your stakeholders, then helping them to think about what are we going to test here, what are we going to try is really important. Finally, the best of the best in terms of the voice of the customer programs that we see, don't ignore their employees. That can often be where the real gold comes from. So think about how you're going to be incorporating your employees in this process so that the data that comes out is going to be even richer. And those are the three things that we would say with regard to strategy for a voice of the customer program. Why are you doing it? What are your data channels? And who's got skin in the game? And I'll pass back over to Pete to talk you through some analysis.
Thanks, Steve. The prospect of having everybody in Scotland getting in touch with you at the same time, that's a scary prospect. So after strategy, the second piece is analysis, and specifically when we're talking about analysis, we're talking about reporting and the different ways that you can report. There's a bunch of different ways you can analyze text. We're not going to get into them here. There are other resources on our website, other videos that will talk you through some of those ways. But when you've looked at that text and you spat it out the other side, there are three things that you need to do. Three ways that you can report the text. The first is always on monitoring. This is the big stuff that will give you an early warning system of problems coming with your service or product or issues that are arising in your customer base. It tends to be a large amount of unknowns. It could be anything. You may or may not know that this was going to happen. And it tends to be the things, the top 10s, what are the top 10 things that are being most spoken about? What are the top 10 things that are driving negative sentiment? The top 10 things driving positive sentiment? What's changing fastest in the data? Most of our customers, most of the time, know the big 3 or 4 issues that their customers have. What they don't necessarily know is 7, 8, 9, and the relative sizes of all of the different problems that they have. So how can we put a number on each of these different things that multiple customers are experiencing? There's also some interesting things you can do around what's unique to you in a data set, and just what's interesting, what's in there that we maybe didn't expect to be in there. So stuff that's in the data that's changing, stuff that you want to know, and it tends to be reported on a dashboard because it's changing all the time, because it's a rolling metric. Dashboards tend to be the best way of reporting those, and Steve's going to talk to you in a little bit about where those dashboards live and how we might encourage as many people as possible to look at those dashboards. So that's always on. The second layer of reporting, the second level down, is subject deep dives. Now, most organizations at the start of a financial year have a set of things that they've got in their business plan that they know they care about. For train operating companies, it might be ticket pricing, or it might be cleanliness of trains, or catering on board, or the ability for people with particular needs to have access to trains. And those aren't necessarily things that they want reporting on all the time. The data maybe isn't moving fast enough to warrant having a always on dashboard, but at regular intervals, once a year, once a quarter, whenever it is, they might want to do a deep dive to see how that stuff's changing. That tends to be a mixture of stuff that's just in the data and questions or hypotheses that you already have. So you can train in advance some bits and pieces that will tell you, a taxonomy or a piece of AI that will tell you how many people experience that. But it's about one subject in depth again and again. Thirdly, and finally, the third level of analysis most insights professionals that we speak to have to prepare themselves for. And it's one that we all love and know. It's the ad hoc reporting. It's the person in your organization coming up to you, usually at 4 o'clock on a Friday, going, hey, what does our data say about this thing that you've never thought about before in your life? And all of a sudden you've got to go, oh, right, blimey, we've got no taxonomies for that. We've got no AI things that will do it. How are we going to find this in the data? And usually you end up with something like this, a word cloud, the most insidious thing ever invented by the human race, and one of Steve's pet peeves as a linguist, or you end up manually tagging data or reading through some stuff and trying to get a sense of something to report back. And when you report back, it tends to be reporting back on email or sending a few graphs through on a small presentation or in a written report back. Interestingly, when the subject deep dives happen, they tend to be a written report, but often we find that a lot of our clients end up presenting those verbally, usually to the executive or the board, and there's some interesting experiences they have then with low attention spans and just wanting to get actions out the other side. So they're the three levels of reporting. As part of the strategy piece, you may want to consider actually what things do you want to measure always on, what things are appropriate for you to take at particular intervals, what do those intervals look like, so you can plan now for stuff that that's coming 6 months, 9 months down the line, so you can start aggregating data and training kind of classifiers for these things, and then finally you can gird your loins for the ad hoc stuff that's going to come to you when it comes to you. Steve, over to you for insight to action.
Thank you so much, guys. I apologize, by the way, for any background noise. My dog has heard a faint noise somewhere and is now convinced that we're all about to be murdered. So she is doing her best to protect us. So apologies if you can hear that in the background. The next stage after you have developed and understood the insight in that data is, I think, the most exciting, because this is the bit where you get to act, where you get to take that insight and turn it into something that will actually make your organization better. And it's the bit that in a lot of VoC programs, this is the bit where you really show your value. So the first thing to think about is, so what? What actions have you taken in the course of the insight that you've developed as a cause of it that has made a difference in the organization? It sounds simple, but the keeping of an action log is one of the best things that you can do as part of your Voice of Customer program. Whenever somebody in the organization acts based on insight that you've developed within the team, ensuring that is tagged, it is put into a central repository where it is visible in the organization. That's huge. It's huge for your team because they will see the insights that they find going into the organization and making a difference. And it's also huge for your business as a whole, showing the value that the voice of the customer programs had. So track actions where you can, track ROI. We've spoken about examples where people are saving time, they're saving money. Make sure that if you can put a time frame and therefore a pound or a dollar value on that, that becomes a really valuable aspect as well. The next thing to think about is not just what are the actions that you've taken, but where are you going to present the data to make the biggest impact in the organization? And our top tip there is to democratize the data. As Pete said, and I love, by the way, the phrase Steve's pet peeves. That is certainly, if I ever run a blog, that's what it's going to be called. And along with dog noise, one of my pet peeves is really simplistic visualizations of this kind of data, which is generally what you get out of the box for most providers. When you're thinking about how this data can be best utilized, doing something basic with the data and then passing it on to other people is not going to be the way that you're going to be able to develop this. Because actually stakeholders in your business probably don't want someone coming and saying, here's everything that's wrong with what you're doing. So we found that the best thing to do is to open the data up to them. And there are a couple of good ways to do that. Lunch and learns are a great way. One of our very best customers absolutely live by lunch and learn. They don't eat unless they're learning. So doing that kind of thing where you socialize the data in amongst the business is really valuable. But then passing it over to them, and the only way you can do that, because nobody wants another dashboard in their lives, is to think about where they are already looking at data and feeding your voice of the customer data in there. For big organizations, that's usually a BI tool. So Power BI, Tableau, those kind of platforms. If your business is already using one, get your data from your voice of the customer tool into those tools, because then your stakeholders can layer their own data on, they can find their own insight in it, and it will feel like theirs, and they'll be at that point much more open to acting to data if they feel like it's theirs. So democratize your data is really important. The third thing that we talk about in this section, getting insights to action, is to go full circle, to come back to the objectives we talked about in strategy. Think about to what extent you have achieved the initial objectives you set out to do. Always be looking back to them. That will create a virtuous circle of you. If you measure what you've done, understand it against your objectives, and then feed back into the next round of strategy, you will find that your voice of the customer program will continue to improve and improve and improve. So that, to me, is the most is the most exciting area for a business, because this is the bit that will really make the difference. So make sure that you have those three things: know what actions you've taken, democratize the data wherever you can, and track back against your objectives.
Thanks, Steve. So there's the three stages: strategy, analysis, insight to action. And we said that we would share with you the big problem that most people have. And in our experience, we find that the strategy piece is something that people, usually with a little bit of guidance, can deal with themselves really, really well. And the insights to action is always the bit certainly that we can't help people with, because it happens within your businesses and you have full control over that. Where we find most people fall down on this is in the analysis phase. And the specific thing that, or the specific two problems that people have, is around listening for things that they don't know they need to listen for, and then following data to a depth at which they can act. So what do I mean by that? Well, back to our three levels of reporting, the always on monitoring. Most people in most of the tools that they're using can only listen for things that they already know they want to listen for. So they have categories set up, either taxonomies or bits of AI, that will be checking things on the way in, saying, this is a delivery issue, this is a customer experience issue, this is an issue where people can't understand weird Scottish linguists on webinars. And if you know that that's going to be a problem, you can train things for that, and you can tag those. The problem comes when something unexpected happens, when something appears in the data that you didn't know that you needed, and you need a data analytics tool that will find stuff that is in the data that is just what the data will bear. It doesn't require any input from humans, nothing trained up in advance, and you don't bring any biases to the table. It just tells you what's in that data. And it's rare that people can find something that that does that, and Steve will tell you in a moment why that is. The second thing, when you've seen something in the data, either you've brought a hypothesis to the table or an unknown has popped up and you've gone, oh, that's really interesting. Let's see who else suffers from that. You need to be able to go down the rabbit hole. You need to be able to follow that, that thread, to find other people talking about the issue, count them up, and then analyze within that data set what are the topics that they're talking about, so that you can get to what we call third level insight. We won't bore you with third level insight now. We don't have time. There are other videos on this website that will bore you about third level insight. I very much urge you to go and watch those, because actually they're quite interesting. But you need to be able to get to a level that is actionable. There is no point in doing this, as Steve's articulated. If you're generating insight for insight's sakes, there's no point in having voice of customer. The only reason to have voice of customer is so that you can act based on the information in the data and improve things for your customer base, so that either you can save or make money. So that's a big problem that most people that we deal with struggle with. Steve, why do they have that problem, and what can you do about it?
I mean, every time that picture comes up, even though I'm expecting it now, it's still, brings a shudder to my spine. This is a picture of me, as you might be able to tell, although I am holding a bit of extra timber these days, and our amazing head of data science, Hugh. We have really, really different backgrounds, and we think that that is what has allowed us to make big strides in the areas that Pete has talked about there. AI will get you a certain amount of the way. You might be aware of NLP, you might be aware of these kind of big neural networks that have taught computers a base level of English. They are amazing things, and they can get you a certain level of the way there. We also think that understanding the underlying structure of the language, the information that is present in every sentence that we ever utter around the job that the words are doing, the way in which the words are interacting with one another, those things will also get you a certain level of the way there. But we couldn't do what we do without each other. And that, to me, is the really exciting part. We think that innovation tends to happen in those intersections between disciplines. And using both AI and advanced linguistics, we feel like we can get further along to those two problems that Pete has described. And we're going to show you very briefly now just a couple of ways in which that works in practice. So to Pete's first question with the always on data, around how do you, if you don't have a specific thing that you're looking for, how can you just understand what the data is telling you? Without knowing what you're looking for, how can you find the interesting information? We use what we call topics to do that. The idea behind these is that we are using the underlying structure of the language to pick out useful fragments of information in the text, bringing them together using what we call automated clustering, which is an AI tool, so that what you end up with is just a list of key issues within the data that will then allow you to go and act on them. So, and that is completely unsupervised. So you go from knowing nothing about a data set to having a good idea of what's in there really, really quickly. That will really help with that first issue of not just seeing the stuff you already know you're looking for, finding new and interesting things in the data. The second thing that is just as valuable is when you know what you're looking for, but you don't know how to find it. That is the kind of ad hoc thing that Pete's talked about. And yes, all power to my insight brethren that are stuck with this problem of somebody turning up at 4:30 and saying, I've got a complaint about this, or I've been always wondering about this. Can you tell me what the data says about it? So you know what you're looking for in this case, but you don't know how to find it. What we do in this situation is we allow you to train your own artificial intelligence. with no previous technical experience at all. So we practice what we preach with regard to democratization. Normally, in these kind of in companies like ours, training AI that's something that a data scientist does. And if you want them to do it for you for a specific thing you're interested in, it's thousands of pounds. It's multiple weeks' work. What we do is let you do it yourself. So type in something you're interested in. The system will go away and find things that mean the same thing, and that's crucial as well. It's not the words that are being used; it's what the person means. You can see in this example here, one of our public transport customers typed in the tram was crowded. Really important issue in post-COVID times. And you can see here it's picking out things that you might expect, like packed tram, busy tram, but it's also picking out things like there are more than 66 people easily on this tram. Now, that's something with no specific word in it that suggests crowding, but when a human reads it, we know it's talking about a crowded tram. So pulling out those things and grouping that together, the system will then automatically, anything new that comes in that is about that same thing, we can put into that category. So really, really quickly, you've gone from nothing about a subject to having AI set up, finding every instance of it, so you can check its relative size, you can see how it's changing over time, you can see if it's getting better or worse. So those are the ways in which we are looking to change the way that your voice of the customer will work with a particular impact on the action you can take. And I'll hand back to Pete.
So there you have it. We promised you 3 steps to best-in-class voice of customer. You've seen strategy, analysis, insight to action, and the big problem that most people we meet have come up against in going through this process, and a solution to that problem. I did promise you a final thing very quickly, and that was an extra special offer. If you go to our website, you will see this on our pricing page. As a text analytics platform, our main business model is software as a service. We're a SaaS platform. Most people buy a 12-month license to use us, and they either access that themselves and have their own insights team running their data on our platform, or there's some element of managed service that we provide for them. However, we know that that's a big commitment. We know that going from never having met 2 idiots like Steve and I to signing up for multiple thousands of pounds per year is a big commitment. So to prove to you the value of our software, we offer a pay-as-you-nerd version where you can try a proof of value or proof of concept and get going on the platform to satisfy yourself that it does what we tell you it does. Normally, that's priced at £4,050. Because you have dutifully sat through our tawdry patter and lasted right till the end of this webinar, if you get in touch before the end of next month, before the end of April, and you mention that you've watched this webinar, we will give you 50% off your pay-as-you-nerd trial project. We will match that. We'll pay the other 50%. We'll put our money where our mouth is, because we are so convinced that you will get some value from it. In addition to that, for the first 5 people that sign up mentioning the webinar, they will also receive a free strategy workshop where we'll run you through those first 3 points. Actually, there's a bit more to it than that, and we'll go into a bit more depth. We'll use a methodology that we've now used successfully on hundreds of customers, and we'll do all of that for those 5 people with our CSO. Yes, this is the bit that I didn't tell Steve about. I am volunteering Steve to run that for you for our first 5 customers. Steve, how's your diary looking for the next month?
I'm just so delighted to be mentioned the same breath as Andre the Giant in the BFG that you can't really tell. We should make it clear. I'm 6'8", 2 meters and 5 centimeters. So this is why I'm getting all these ludicrous tall jokes if you've never met me before and you're wondering, because I'm currently sitting down. But yes, no, really delighted, really excited about this. And I think we'll have a lot of fun. We'll get a lot of really interesting stuff done.
All right, brilliant. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. We hope that you have enjoyed it. More than anything, we hope you've taken something of value. We hope you've learned something, and you've got at least 1 or 2 practical tips that you can take away today and apply to your voice of customer program. If there's anything at all that we've mentioned that you thought was remotely interesting, any questions that you have, or anything that you'd like to speak to us further about, as you've already probably worked out, we love to talk. So get in touch with us on our website, through email, on social media, and we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time, and goodbye.